All right, so in this video, let's try to create an HTML form and use it to submit some information to our JSON API that we just did right here. So let's start by building the form. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code project. I'm not going to touch any of this stuff we did before. Let's just create a couple of new files. So one is going to be customers HTML, the other one is customers JS, the JavaScript. Now let's go grab some Bootstrap and put it for our HTML. So I'll go to getbootstrap.com. Get started. Let's get some starting template and just paste it over here. And right below all of these scripts, let's link to our customers JS file. And here we have an H1. Let's just type something in here. And below, let's create a form to basically house something that will handle this data. So we have name, last name, phone number, and city. So let's go to our Bootstrap docs, get to components, forms. Let's try to get a form. Maybe something like this so we can have things side by side. So this is my form. This is a row with 2 columns and we have input fields. So first name, last name, excellent. That's exactly what we have. And we need another row. So I'm going to copy the structure and paste it below. And this one is going to have phone and city. And all of those should be text fields. So input type text should work just fine. We will need some sort of button to submit this form, like this one. So I'll put it inside of the form right below this last div. We will change this to send or some other text. And we need to do a bunch of IDs here for all these inputs. And I'm going to add an ID to the form itself. So now that we have IDs for all of these, I'm going to go to JavaScript and grab all of those elements. And we'll use getElementById and use those IDs to actually capture those and save them in a variable. So 4 fields, the form, and the submit button. That's pretty much all we got. Let's also just wrap this entire thing in a div with a class container. And we'll close this all the way down here after the form. I will just tap this in to make it look nicer. Let's just take a look at this and see what this looks like. It's not going to look great, I assume, but that's not the point of this video anyways. So I'm going to do go live. So we basically have add a customer, 4 input boxes, and a send button. I suppose just to make it look decent, we can add a little margin below this rows, or maybe add a padding. We could add a little more, I guess. Yeah, good enough. I'm not going to spend too much time on designing this. That's pretty much the form. So now we need to work with this. So we want to make sure we grab the information from these fields. And when we click send, we want to basically add that to our spreadsheet. That's pretty much what we're trying to do here. So for that, let's go to our JavaScript and we're going to create a function. And we're going to assign that function to the form submit event. So the form is this customer form. We already have it as a variable. We're going to add an event listener. And there should be a submit event. That's when that form is submitted. And we're going to run this after submit function. Now, because this is an actual HTML form, right now, if I go back to this, see there's this send button. Now, if you pay attention here, we're in this customer's HTML file. Now, if I click on the send, you'll see how this page will kind of resubmit and refresh. See, it kind of reloaded. It happens really fast. But if you look here in the top, you'll see that happening. And then it also adds this question mark to the end. We don't want that to happen. We want to handle our form submissions ourselves instead of having that submission happening. Now, sometimes I just don't use the form tag at all to make sure that happens. But if you have the form tag, you can handle that too. And the way you can handle this function is going to pass an event here. And what you can do, you can take that, and this has this method prevent default. And the default basically for that is to submit the form and do the whole reload that it does. Now this is going to prevent that from happening. So if I save this, go back to this, let's actually close this and reload this thing. So I'm going to go back here, remove this, and go live again. So now you see we have customers HTML, no question marks or anything. If I hit send, see that thing that was happening, that flickering, that question mark, none of that is happening anymore. Because what we're doing, we're grabbing the submission and we prevent the default behavior of the browser. So now with that, we can actually handle what we need to be done ourselves. And what we need to do, we basically have to just grab all of this information and send it to our API. So let's just create an object from all of this. And while I'm creating this object, I'll create it using the actual parameters we're going to need in our API. So if you remember, we went with this column names. So first, last, phone, city, all lowercase. So that's pretty much what I'm going to use in this object. So I'm going to make the first is whatever comes from this first name field dot value. And we need to basically repeat this for the rest. And these are column names from our spreadsheet. And all of these will be our HTML elements and their values. And we'll set this info object. That's what I called it. Maybe I should have called it something else, but it doesn't matter. Now with this, once we have this object, now we can use our fetch API to actually submit our request. So let's just do a URL here. And we'll pass that URL to this fetch. Now the URL is going to be the actual URL for our web app. And we're going to fetch that URL. And this is going to accept an object. So this is where we're going to set what type of request this is going to be. Let's actually go back to one of the JavaScripts we did before this one. We've kind of done this before. See this object right here. So I'm just going to copy all of that. Paste it right over that. Let me remove some of this stuff so it takes less space. Now, one thing that I did here when I was doing this API, I remember when I was doing this fetch request with a post, I did this no CORS to make it go through. After I tested this, I found out that what you could do as an alternative, if you don't pass any headers, then you don't have to do this no CORS. And then you can do a regular request and it just works fine. So we're going to do a post request. We're going to do no cache, I guess. we're still going to do redirect follow, and this is going to be the body that we're going to send to our API. And what we're going to send is not this name is John. Instead, we're going to send this info object. So that would be the fetch. So we're going to fetch that URL. This is the information we're going to send to that URL. And after that, we can do .then. So this is pretty much the response we're going to get after that fetching is done. So usually that would be like a JSON response if we get some response from our API. So let's take that, I'm going to call it res, and we'll take that and convert it to a JSON. Then we do another .then here. And at this point, that response here should be the actual response. So let's actually do something like this. Let's actually move this .then on a new line too, similar to this one, so it's looking kind of nicer. Let's just try to now console log the response and see what we get. And I'm going to do a semicolon for now here to finish this fetch. So with this, let's just save this. Try to go back and open our form. And maybe while we have that, I'll open my spreadsheet too. So this is the form that should have been reloaded by itself. I'm using live server, and let's just try to enter some information. So Olivia Smith is the last line. Let's try to enter something else. So I'm going to click send. Before I do that, let's actually open the console. So I'm going to click send. So let's see. So see, we got the response back. So if you remember, we did that API that if everything is working correctly, it should return the object with the new ID that was assigned. So apparently that worked. So if we go back and check out our spreadsheet, now we should have ID 125 with John Doe. And there it is, we do. So we need to handle the form behavior and do something with it, but it works. Now, I'm starting to think the way I structured that API response, because if you remember what I did that if, for example, you don't pass one of these required columns. So for example, let's say I comment out the last name. So now we have first, phone, and city. This should give us an error response back. So let's try that, no last in this, and go back and try to, I'm just going to keep the same stuff and just resubmit it. So see, it's a blank thing. I'm going to click send. And see, I got status 500, message invalid arguments passed. And that's because that's the way we did this post function. We said that if we don't pass all the required arguments or the column names don't match, we're going to return this response, which for whatever reason I chose status 500 and this message. Now, when it goes through, then I did this other response, which is the actual JSON body. So I have to figure out a couple of ways. So one way I can do it, I can keep it this way. But then if I keep it this way, I have to make sure that when I return this body JSON, then I also return it in a similar fashion. So I have to do some sort of status, like status 200 for OK. And then the second one will be the data, which is the body JSON. So this way, then I can check if the status is 200, then I'll know that everything went well. So that's one way I can go about this. Now, what I don't like about it is that for fetch, as long as I'm returning any response, it's basically a valid response. So at this point, it's still going to be a valid response, even though it's really failing. Now, there's no like headers that we can turn back. So usually this is where you would use headers to pass like status, but you cannot do this with this Google Sheets server we have. So I'm thinking maybe we should just change our API to pass an error instead of passing a valid response. So maybe instead of returning this, we can throw an error instead. So I'm going to try that to see what happens. So I'm going to just comment out these 2 lines that returns the response. And instead, we're going to throw an error. This will be the error message. So just in case, let's just add a return here. Even though I don't think that's necessary, let's just redeploy this and see what happens. All right, so the link should be the same. All of that should be the same. So let's just go back and try to call this again. So I'm just going to reload this thing. And let's just hit send. And again, if you remember, the whole last is turned off here, so it should give us some sort of error. So yeah, so that error seems to have worked, and this is what AppScript does. So if it doesn't return anything valid, you're gonna get this course error, which is fine. So that's what I'm gonna use. By getting an error, I'm gonna know that something went wrong. And by not getting an error, I'm gonna know that it went well. So what this will allow me to do is here, I should be able to use .catch. And let's just console log that error, save it, go back, and let's just hit send one more time. Oh, apparently as I was doing this, I did undo here, and now this is correct. All right, so that's fine, but it doesn't help me understand if I'm still able to process here going forward. So why don't we try to do another console log like this? And let's just go back and resubmit that and see if that runs until the console log or not. It does. So we're able to get to that line. So that's good. So now let's try to continue. So now we have this catch. This is for cases when this didn't work. And we have this for cases that it does work. So when it works, what do we want to do? We want to be able to just reset all of these fields to blank. So we should be able to do that by probably just taking the form and resetting it. So the form is basically this custom form element we have here. So if all of that goes well, let's just take the form and reset should be one of the, not that, this should be one of the methods available on the form. Let's try that and see what happens. So I'm going to save this. Let's actually make this also valid so we can pass this. So I'm going to go back and we have this John, etc. We have all these fields. I'm going to click send. So the form was submitted. See, the object is returned and it's cleared. And that should now be in our database again. Let's just delete these 3 lines and do this one more time. So I'm going to get back to this form. Cleared, and the information is here. Very nice. So that does what it's supposed to do. It clears the form. We probably want some sort of handling because when I click send, it's kind of weird. It takes some time for this to send the information, and you know, we have this weird situation that we have to wait and we don't know what's happening. So maybe we should have some visual indication that it's submitting. Let's go to Bootstrap and try to grab some spinners. Let's see what's available here that should be good to use. Maybe we'll use something like this, right in the button. I like that. See, there is the button and it's disabled. Not the first one, the second one looks good. So I'm going to copy this button go back to our HTML. Right below this button, let's paste this and see what we have to change to make this happen. So instead of loading, we'll say saving. So this is the button disabled. So we probably don't want it disabled by default, but we can make it disabled while we're submitting. But for now, let's just transfer this ID over here. And let's just save this and see what this looks like. And see, we have this saving situation. So basically what I want to happen, I want this to be send. When we click on it, I want it to turn into this saving thing until it's done, and then we'll get back to send. Which means originally it should not be saying saving, it should just say send. So let's just make this send, and let's just make this spinner hidden. So I'm gonna add a class d_none, and hopefully that will make the button look, it's disabled now, it should not be disabled. So let's remove this disabled, and we now can remove this button. Maybe we should add the type submit to it too. And this old button now should be gone. So if I save this, now it should look the same. So what I'm gonna do at this point, I want that to, when we click on send, I want that to turn into that saving button that's disabled. And while I'm doing that, I also want to do a couple of things here so I can actually target some elements. Like this span should have an ID. And this should probably be in a span too. And we'll give that an ID too. Now we need to grab those elements too in our elements list. And now we should have access to them. So what I need to happen right after we hit this after submit and we're about to basically do the fetch. So we want to make sure that by the time we get to this fetch, we make that button disabled and have that spinning thing happening. So right above that fetch, let's take the button text, which is a span, and make the text content saving. So we're going to change the text of the button to saving. And by the button, I really mean this span that has this text in it. Now, as we do that, we want to make sure we also remove this d_none from this button spinner so it shows up. So I'm going to take the button spinner and we're going to take the class list and we're going to remove that d_none class. So what should happen right now, if I go back and click on the send, see, it says saving. And it's also probably going to add the line with all those blanks, but that's fine. That's a separate issue. Now, this should also be disabled, this button. So let's also do that. So I think we should be able to do that by simply taking the button, the submit button, and just set disabled property to true. And I think that should take care of this initial state. So if I go back to this, I hit send. See, it says saving, it's disabled, and then it's going to do what it's going to do. Now, what we want to happen after this is done saving, it should just go back to the normal. So basically, all of these things we did, we're going to change them back. So I'm going to copy those 3 lines, and it's going to happen if it's successful. So we're going to reset the form, and then after we reset the form, instead of saying saving, we're going to change to send again. We're going to add that d_none class, and we're going to change this to false. So now if I go back and let's just do some entries. If I hit send right now, See, saving, it's done saving, it clears the form, and it's done. Now we should have our line. Now we could also do something with this catch to say what should happen if there is some sort of error. And you could have some sort of message pop up or something like that. I don't know, whatever you would want to happen. So maybe we'll just put some warning message down here. Let's just go to our Bootstrap and get to alerts. And this one, and we'll put that right, I guess, below the button. And just give it an ID. And let's also grab that in our variables. So right now it should already be showing up here like this. And we could add a little, I guess, margin on top or something. So we don't want this to be visible. So we'll make it d-none again to hide it. But we'll basically make it pop up if something goes wrong, which is where we're going to do this catch thing. So what we could do, we can take that unknown error and to the class list, well, we're going to remove that d-none class. So basically it will become visible. And then we'll set some sort of set timeout to remove that error in a few seconds or something. So we'll just do a function here and we'll say in 3000 milliseconds, which should be in 3 seconds, to run this, which will basically just remove that error. So we'll add the d-none. We also want to make sure that we reset that button at some point. So maybe after that, like 2-3 seconds, we'll just reset the button to the default. So I'm just gonna take this and put it in here too. So we'll make it send, we'll make it without the spinner, and we will stop it being disabled. So now we need to figure out a way to test this, because right now it's going to run. So to get that error message, let's just again go and remove one of these required fields like the last. I'm going to save this, go back and hit send. See, we got this, and then it's back to normal. So that's our catch here. If something goes wrong and the API doesn't respond the way it should, this is what we're going to do. So I am going to turn this back to the way it should be. So now we have the regular send, we have the catch. So the only thing you could do at this point is probably add some form validation. So if these two are required, then we're probably going to add some required to those. So this first name, this is going to be required. And the last name is going to be required. And we'll do maybe like the minimum length for the first name and the last name. So now if I save this, go back, if I click send, see, it doesn't even trigger the function because these are required. So we get this validation messages from our HTML5 validation. And you could make this fancier. Now, if I type one character, it's still not going to be valid. And I don't have to do phone and city, so I should be able to send this now. Whoa, that's taking too long. But it seems it did it anyways. So it was taking long for whatever reason for Google Sheets to do what it needs to do. So there we go. We got John Peters in here. And then you could make this validation fancier. Let's try to add a little custom messaging here. So I'm going to go to Bootstrap and get to my forms. Let's just scroll down until we find validation stuff. See this error messages? That's what I want, similar to this zip code. So this goes right below the input, see invalid feedback. So we'll do it for the first name and the last name. So now if I save this, go back, if I hit send, that's not going to do anything because we probably have to handle those validations ourselves. So let's see how we do that. Okay, so basically it says you need to add this no validate Boolean attribute to your form. Similar to this, see? Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to our form and add no validate. And then I guess that's not going to do any validation now, but we should be handling the validation ourselves. But let's just test this to see if that's true. So if I hit send, so it saves basically the blanks. So basically that bypasses the default validation. So now we're going to do our own validation, and I'm just going to use that Bootstrap example in this case. See, what I have is that when we do the form submit, and that triggers the function, see what they're doing? They're doing this. So event being this E, okay? Go to our JavaScript, and that's going to be right in here in the beginning. So what they're doing here, they're checking if the form is valid. And our form is going to be this customer form. So we're going to check the validity for that customer form. If the validity is false, then we're going to do this and this. Otherwise, it's doing this. It's adding that it was validated. So I think I'm going to add a return here and check what happens. So let's save this. Let's go check this out. So here we go. We have our form. I'm going to hit send. That didn't trigger anything, but we probably need something to add those classes. Well, basically it stops the thing from happening. So this is happening, so it checks the validity and it stops it. But, oh, actually, let's just change this to custom form, even though that doesn't matter. We don't even get there. So maybe we should use this isInvalid class and assign it ourselves to everything that's not valid. So I guess let's go and do that. So I'm going to take this. So we're going to stop that. And then we need to grab all the fields that are not valid. So let's just copy this, go back to that. And what we'll do after the form is not valid, we'll go in here and we'll basically run a loop and do this whole validation ourselves pretty much. So we're going to check if the form is valid. It's going to tell us true. So instead, we're going to check if the form is not valid. Well, in this case, it's not the form, it's the field. Let's actually call this field. So I'm going to take the form, grab all the elements in the form, and then we're going to loop through all those elements in the form. And if the field is not valid, then we're going to add invalid class to the field. So we'll take the field and we'll do the class list and we'll add that class from Bootstrap. This is invalid. So now hopefully if this works, if I hit send, string contains an invalid character. So we have a space. I don't know how I did that, but let's just do this again. All right, good. Now the other thing we probably have to do is clear all of that too. So we need to make sure we get back to basically normal. So it also added this green stuff that we need to reset. So let's try to do that. Was that because this was validated? Is that why we got the green? Let's try that. And also this prevent default is happening anyways. So we'll just move this on top here and remove it from here. And I have a feeling this will stop that green stuff from happening. It did. Now we just have to clear these, which basically means we have to go through the fields and remove all of those that are saying invalid. So I'm going to take all of those and we're going to remove is invalid from those. Let's get rid of this line. And I think that should take care of our custom validation now. So I got this, I hit send, I get the errors. So that did not remove the class. Oh, that's because we don't need to check if it's valid at this point. I think it's too late today. I'm making too many mistakes. All right, let's get back. Okay, finally, that's gone. Good, so now we got our custom validation happening on this form too. We could grab this thing and put it on our GitHub. So maybe I'll just do that too since I went this far. So this is what we did. So I'm just gonna take all of this stuff, erase it, and change it with this new files. So I'll just keep this one called index, and we'll replace it with our own HTML. And commit those changes. Go back, this one, we have to change the name of this file because it was called customers.js. And we need to just grab this. And again, you could run this through something like Babel. That should take care of this for off loops and all that stuff that I did here for let field off instead of for field off, which I'm probably going to fix while I'm doing it here. So we'll do let here and let in here too. Good enough. Let's just commit those changes. And it may take a little bit because I renamed the file too, but let's go and open our public link. Now let's just try this. So see, we get the error. Now we need to be able to add some data. So the last one we have is Olivia again, Miami. Let's just go here and add something. And it works just fine on our public link. And we have our data right there. And that should do it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.